Welcome to Carole Tuesday, episode 23, the penultimate episode. We're one step away from actually knowing what the miraculous 7 minutes actually are, unless it happens in this episode, in which case I can't help you, or I can help you in that case, who's going to watch it right now. So, last week, short recap, it was the Grammys. They had to prove to Crystal-san that they could perform with her, and they did. They ended up performing with Crystal-san. It was all well, it was all good. And then there was Angela's breakdown after the unfortunate death of her mother and her parental figure after finding out that she was in fact not her mother's child in the first place. So it doesn't get any worse than that. That's pretty much as bad as it can get. Your mother gets sick and instantly dies, and before she dies tells you that you're not really her kid in the first place. So after those traumatic events, Angela collapses on stage and does win actually the new Best Artist Grammy, the Mars Grammy. But she immediately collapses afterwards, and everyone finds out that she's been struggling and that her mom died the same day that she performed at the Grammys. And that was last episode, so without further ado, let's get started with episode 23. Okay, so the last couple of episodes, we've got kind of this they're pointing out that Valerie Simmons has the same ideology as a Trump figure, she's basically Trump but in Mars. And we also got the Amer, Ezekiel kind of deportation plot line, and now we have them pulling up on the equivalent of what looks like a African American person in the U.S. and just randomly getting accosted by the police. Clearly, the show is trying to make some kind of political statement here. My problem is not so much with the point that it's trying to make a political statement. It's that by doing so, they kind of undermine the other parts of the show. The show is supposed to be about music and everything. And while all the people that deal with these troubles are musicians, we don't really see the kind of effect that it has on Carole Tuesday that it perhaps should have. There's a show called Years and Years, right? It's I think it's a BBC show or an HBO show. It's set in London. It has a fully British cast, and one of the main plot lines of their story was that this man's boyfriend gets deported from the UK, and he has to go back to his country where homosexuality is criminalized, and they kind of prosecute people for being gay, and it's this whole storyline. In the end, it ends up with it having drastic consequences for the family of the cast. My problem with Carole Tuesday making these kind of same political statements is that they kind of get to use the political statements as an additive kind of, without it having really any transformative effect to the story in any sense. That being said, it's not necessarily a bad thing that they do choose to include those. I would prefer they include them rather than they didn't include them. I just wish they would treat it a little better and they had more of an effect on Carole Tuesday themselves. For example, when Amer was deported, what if Carole had gone to visit him and they mistook her for one of the people that Amer was hiding out with, and they also deported her? Because she's a refugee status, I don't think she has any legal status in Mars. So if she was to be deported in that way, I think that would have the kind of actual impact that they would be looking for. But Carole is obviously a person of color type character, and she's included in the main cast, but she doesn't face any of the same consequences that the other people of color in the show do. I just find it to be a little subpar, the inclusion of all these political and societal themes without it having any real effect. It kind of just feels like it's a topping instead of an actual ingredient of the show itself. That's my only problem with it. Also, I called it. As soon as the weather station bombing went down, I was like, Valerie Simmons is behind this in some way. It turns out it was her consultant, Jerry. We don't know if she ordered him to do that or if he just did it by himself, but it was definitely one of the two of them, or both of them, that were involved in this. I called this from the very beginning, first of all, just trying to take some credit here. Second of all, I don't like how they're pinning all the blame for her kind of shady actions on the consultants, because that's always what ends up happening, is that the shadiness gets passed on to the consultant, and the political candidate themselves kind of dodges the criminal charges or suspicious activity, the societal pariahness that comes with it. They dodge that and they get to go on with their political career regardless of who it is, just because they accuse the consultant and they say it's all the consultant's fault. I didn't really have anything to do with this. I would like it if the show pinned the blame on the politician themselves and being like, Jerry is fine, but like Valerie Simmons was the mastermind behind all this. I would appreciate that more, because it feels like by spinning the consultant off, we're not really getting to the meat of the problem. That's not anything to do with the show, really. That's more of a real world comment more than anything. So take that how you will. Also, it also occurred to me that Mars, in this sense, check this out, right? Mars, in this sense, is probably like a literal analogy for the United States. Here's my reasoning. Now, most people don't think of the indigenous peoples, so I'm going to leave that out for this, but Mars was literally not populated by anyone, so everyone who lives on Mars currently is an immigrant. So for her to want to rid Mars of immigrants is probably the most oxymoronic thing that you could do. Like, it doesn't make any sense, because Mars is lifeless without people that came to it. So without those people, there would be no people on Mars. There are no original Mars lifers. No one's been there since the beginning of Mars. Again, not including indigenous people, which is what the equivalent of that would be in the US. So those are the original inhabitants of the US. So not including those people, it seems like in this case Mars is a literal analogy for the US. Just saying. See, this is my problem with the show. Until now, this wasn't even a thing, until the last 3 episodes, right? What I would have liked to have seen is this theme to be present from the very beginning. Now, granted, they need a couple of episodes to set up the characters in the world and everything, but I feel like, for example, we had a 6-episode arc where nothing was happening but them just being in a talent show. That's all that was happening for 6 episodes out of a 24-episode show. So 25% of the time, we weren't talking about politics, society, none of that stuff. We weren't talking about political struggles, censorship. We weren't even talking about Valerie Simmons' campaign at all for 6 episodes. Maybe even more. And then all of a sudden, after episode 13, when the talent show arc ends, we cut back to the world at large. Valerie Simmons' whole political career. The Kyle journalist investigating her. Angela stalker plot. All this happens as soon as we come back from the talent show, which I maintain was completely pointless. And I get that people are going to be angry about that, but it was. A lot of the characters we introduced there just disappeared immediately after it ended, and we've never seen them since. And Erdogan, who was there from episode 3 or whatever when they first bumped into him, is still here somehow. So that whole arc was just completely pointless. That being said, I'm glad they're talking about this now, even if they're only doing it with 2 episodes to go. It kind of feels to me, low-key, like they just wanted some theme to be around for the ending, and so they shoved this in there. But knowing who the staff is that are behind this, Studio Bones, Shinichiro, I feel like they wanted to do this the whole time and either just didn't deliver on it in the way that they expected themselves to, or they felt that they had to hold back because of the mainstream appeal of the show. If it's the first one, I can understand that that's a possibility that could happen. Sometimes when you intend to do things a certain way, it doesn't come out the way that you intended to, and that's fine. You can't really do anything about that. Just, move on to the next one, and we'll talk about that when we do that one. So if it's the second one and they felt like they wanted to talk about the censorship aspect and all this stuff, but if they felt like the show had a different mainstream appeal that had just to do with the musicians and the music, which we've already talked about, how their YouTube videos get hundreds of thousands of views and all that. If it's that, then I really feel like you've compromised your artistic integrity there if you're going for that. And then you want to come back and cash in on your art bucks by including the censorship argument in the last 2 episodes. Now, I've been here the whole time. I've been here since episode 1 doing this show, and I feel like it's been almost half a year since I started covering the show. 6 months, almost. And I really feel along the way they lost the plot a lot of times. And they've come back right at the end to make it make sense and make it all nice and, palatable for the end, and be like, hey, it was this big finale where we had all these artists performing to try to, protest censorship and support immigrants and everything. But that really hasn't been an overriding theme of the show. It's only been present in certain parts of the show, I would say after episode 18 or so, and maybe at the very beginning, and that's pretty much it. The only development we've gotten with Carole's particular refugee arc is that she met her dad, who came to her. She didn't even go to find him. And they didn't really talk much other than he'll come back to Mars sometime to see her perform. And that was that. That's it in terms of character development for the main characters. And now we've reached this point where they're gathering musicians to stage some kind of like protest or something. I mean, I like the idea. The idea is good, but the execution is definitely lacking, in my opinion. Wait 1 second, right? So they're worried about censorship being the death of music, but since the very beginning of the show, AI has been touted as the death of music. So why is there a sudden pivot towards censorship when AI was supposed to be that threat? Now, if this show was completely about AI and how AI has no creative integrity by itself, then it would make way more sense, because it's been set up from episode 1 when we met Angela, when she was becoming a music idol, I guess, and she had this AI person specifically there to make songs for her using AI. But now we've done a 180 and gone to the point where the show is now about censorship and the political state sticking their hand in your creative endeavors. Is this just Watanabe telling us that he doesn't like the kind of conservative society that Japan is? Does he want it to be more liberal? Is he worried about censorship in the Japanese government? Because I thought AI was supposed to be the problem. We were setting up Tao, we set up multiple AI villains. We had that one bunny that was in Angela's life that was basically stalking her for someone else. All of that is just completely useless because now we've switched to a censorship plotline. Now there has been some setup for it with Ezekiel, Amer, and the person who got arrested in this episode, and Valerie Simmons has been a recurring character. But it was never about her censorship problems. It was always about her wanting to get rid of immigrants and, using AI and technology to manipulate elections. That's what it's been about since episode 14. Now we're in episode 23 and we're being told that censorship is the death of music. I'm not saying that that's not a good storyline to follow. I'm just saying that we're skipping beats here. We're skipping levels. We're moving all over the place in order to find a good way to resolve this. Maybe they couldn't deal with the called shot. They called the shot were the 7 miraculous minutes, and they were going to fix everything by performing at the very end of the show. And maybe they just couldn't think of another way to do that other than this. I kind of don't want to believe that, though. I kind of believe Bones and Shinichiro have a better vision for the show than that. But this is what they're giving us. Oh, so she doesn't know. Okay. Well, it's good that she doesn't know, but again, we're letting the politician get away with it and the consultant take the blame for everything. I'm okay with that to some extent, but at least we know now definitively that she didn't know. Yo, that's the lamest motivation ever. Come on, bro. I thought Kyle just wanted to unveil what was underneath the scummy, outer surface of every politician, but it turns out he just has a mom complex, this is the equivalent of, the whole Batman, Superman, Martha thing. This is pretty bad. It's you should have a problem with your mom, too, because I had a problem with my mom. And I skipped over some stuff earlier because this episode's getting out of hand at this point, but we saw some good stuff about them, bringing the musicians together, and I have absolutely no problem with that. Let it be known, I have no problem with them uniting the musicians to make some kind of last stand effort. I think it's noble. I think it's to be praised. If someone did something like that in real life, I would do my best to support them in any way that I could. That being said, it's kind of out of nowhere. It's not like they're standing up to anything that's been set up in the past. It's only been 4 episodes since we even got started with this whole Valerie Simmons is a huge villain, Ezekiel deportation arc. It's fine. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's bad. Not saying it's bad, but it is kind of unmotivated in the grand arc of the series, and I don't like it for that reason only. That's the only reason I don't like it. Nothing else about this is bad to me. Okay, continuing. They missed an opportunity here. They could have called this episode Heal the World instead of Don't Stop Believing. And called the last episode Don't Stop Believing and called this Heal the World, because that's the kind of Heal the World truistic language we're getting in this episode. Again, no problem with it. It just seems like for all the different complicated stuff they were setting up with the AI and how, so identical to real life, it might as well be real life, to push all of that aside and just focus on one aspect of what they've been doing for the last half of the second core of the show just seems a little shallow to me. And that was episode 23 of Carole Tuesday. I think I got a little bit too heated at the start of this episode. It's just because I don't like the direction the show's going in, and I felt like I had to express that. And putting it here at the end is not going to help anybody, because nobody's even going to watch this far. So if you've made it this far and you like Carole Tuesday and think that I'm completely wrong, please leave a non-flaming nice comment in the comments down below as to why you think the show is actually good and why I'm wrong. I'd love to hear that. I'm always down to get opinions from other people. That's kind of the point of this whole channel, is to give opinions that you may not have heard anywhere else, and to give analysis that you may not have heard anywhere else. That's the whole point. That's why I cover shows that other people don't cover most of the time. That being said, episode 23 was kind of a little bit of a letdown for me compared to what we got last week. I actually liked the episode last week. If you remember, I felt like we were establishing clear emotional stakes, but now we've kind of zoomed out on that tiny little picture that we had, which is where I think the show works best, is when it's at a small scale, when it's working with only a few characters, trying to put together their motivations and kind of make it seem like the large-scale events that happen affect us even on a minute level. That's where I feel like the show does its best. And where it does its worst to me is when it's trying to make some kind of broad statement, which I really think it's not qualified to do. It really hasn't established any kind of broad, large-scale stakes, or some emotional attachment to the world in general, because we don't even like Mars at all. We kind of think it's a bad place to be just because from the very beginning we're being told that it's cold and calculating, it's not really welcoming at all. It had to be transformed into this place where even they can survive just a little bit. We like the characters more than we like the setting. So if the setting's in danger, we don't really care unless the characters are in danger also. And the characters don't really seem to be in danger. The musicians that are participating in this event are not the musicians that are going to be prosecuted, or persecuted rather. So it feels kind of like, let's stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves, which is good in a way, but to have those people stand up for themselves empowers them and makes it more natural and grassroots than having someone else do it for you. That's always been the case. So to me, the whole protest movements felt kind of artificial to me. That being said, I already explained how I felt like if Carole had been involved in this, it would have been gut-wrenching, the impact of the actual events that took place, instead of it being Amer, who we don't really know. We only knew for about 2 episodes before he was deported. If it had been Carole or someone who we'd been with the whole time, it would have been an actual impactful plot point. That being said, the show itself, I feel, is coming to a conclusion, and the conclusion is actually a conclusion. So that's something to be cheered more than anything else. There are many shows that kind of just end in a poof, and we don't really understand where they're going. At least this ending has a clear direction and motivation, and I think it should be praised for that, if nothing else. I don't really have anything else to say about this episode. I'm gonna just save it all for next week when the finale comes around and we get the actual miraculous 7 minutes. They kept telling us that it was brought around by Carole Tuesday, but actually it was pretty much every single musician on Mars that made it happen. So they kind of let us on in that sense. And I've been speculating about these miraculous 7 minutes since episode 2, basically. So it's good to see a conclusion to it once and for all, and to just have this show reach where it was trying to reach this whole time so desperately. That's all for episode 23 of Carole Tuesday. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next video.